The old ranch was falling apart. Paint peeled off the wooden fences, the roof sagged in places, and the wind carried the dry scent of dust and hay through the empty fields. Tom didn't have much left, a few acres of land, a rusty pickup truck, and a heart full of memories that hurt to think about. He'd lost his wife 2 years ago, and since then, life had become a slow, silent routine. Every morning he'd walk the same path to the barn, look at the same empty stalls, and wonder if anything good could ever grow in this soil again. That morning, though, something different caught his eye. A small crowd had gathered by the auction yard at the edge of town, a place where unwanted animals were sold for next to nothing. Tom wasn't planning to stop. He'd been there once before, and the sight of broken creatures being traded like junk had stayed with him. But something, maybe a whisper of instinct or the echo of loneliness, made him park his truck and walk toward the noise. The air was heavy with the sound of hooves, chains, and low murmurs. Farmers inspected animals with rough hands, traders shouted numbers, and a thin line of frightened horses stood tied to the fence. One of them, a frail mare, her ribs visible beneath her dirty coat, stood motionless. Her eyes were hollow, yet deep, like she'd seen too much and expected nothing more. Tom stopped. For a moment, the world around him disappeared. The shouts, the dust, the crowd. It all faded, leaving only him and that trembling horse staring at each other. Her head hung low, but her gaze never left his. It wasn't fear. It wasn't defiance. It was something softer, like a quiet plea. He asked the auctioneer, "What's her story?" The man laughed. "That one? Nothing to tell. Old, sick, probably won't last the month. Nobody wants her. You can take her for $1 if you want the trouble." $1. One lonely coin. Tom looked at it in his palm, then at her again. His heart tightened. He didn't need another mouth to feed, didn't need another reminder of how much he'd lost. But something about that horse felt like a mirror, broken, forgotten, still standing. Without saying a word, he reached out the coin. "I'll take her," he said. The crowd barely noticed as the deal was made. Tom led the mare out of the pen, her legs shaky, her breath shallow. When they reached the open road, she stumbled once, and he caught her gently, whispering, "Easy now. You're safe." He didn't know it then, but that single dollar, that small act of kindness, would change everything. Because in the months to come, the starving horse he rescued would return the favor in a way he could never have imagined. The drive back to the ranch was slow. The mare, too tired to protest, leaned against the trailer rail as if the slightest wobble might take her down. When Tom opened the gate to the pasture, she didn't bolt or even look around. She simply stood there, a thin outline of a life that had once run wild. Tom filled a bucket with clean water and set it beside a flake of soft hay, torn into smaller clumps so she wouldn't choke. He'd learned that much years ago, weak horses don't need heroics, they need patience measured in fistfuls and minutes. He called the local vet, a woman named Hayes who'd patched up half the county's animals and a few of its people when pride got in the way of hospitals. She arrived with quiet hands and a skeptical eyebrow. "You paid for her?" she asked, checking the mare's gums, counting ribs with a gentle press. $1, Tom said, half embarrassed, half defiant. "Overpaid," Hayes muttered, then sighed. "All right. Parasites, dehydration, malnutrition. She's older than she looks, or maybe just worn thin by a hard road. We'll go slow. Hydration first. Small feedings. No corn, no sudden changes. And keep her warm at night. Bones like these don't hold heat." Tom nodded and worked like a man with a purpose he didn't fully understand. He strung a heat lamp in the stall, hung a salt lick, and folded 2 wool blankets over the door in case the wind rose. When he walked away, he felt the old ache in his chest, the echo of empty rooms and a house that had grown quiet too quickly. The mare nickered, a faint rasp of sound that pulled him back. He turned and found her watching him, eyes no longer hollow but curious, as if trying to measure the size of the man who had traded a coin for a burden. "You need a name," he said. "Can't keep calling you Hey Dot." He studied the white sprinkle on her forehead, like a smudge of dawn. June, he decided, though it wasn't June at all. You look like a second chance. The first week was a study in increments. June took a few mouthfuls of wet hay, then more the next hour. She drank, lifted her head, and, on the fourth day, stepped out into the thin winter sun. Tom followed at a distance, the lead rope loose, resisting the urge to ask for more than she could give. When she paused to listen to the wind, he listened, too. And when she lowered her head to nibble at a tuft of pale grass, he smiled without meaning to. Smiling felt strange in his mouth, like a word you haven't spoken since childhood. Nights were the hardest. The ranch groaned and settled as the temperature dropped, and grief liked to creep in through the gaps. Tom kept a chair by the stall and read aloud from an old paperback he found under the truck seat, some story about rivers and stubborn men. June didn't care about the plot. She cared about the cadence. About the fact that someone's voice filled the silence. On the seventh night, she stretched her neck and touched his shoulder with her whiskered lip. It was nothing and everything. Tom cleared his throat and pretended dust had got in his eyes. By the second week, June's coat began to shine where muck had clung. Hayes, surprised, raised her eyebrow in the other direction. Keep doing what you're doing, she said. She's choosing you. Maybe that was it, maybe choosing was the miracle. June began to meet him at the gate, a slow shuffle that became a steady walk. She learned his pockets kept apple slices, and he learned to cut them thin. She let him brush her, and he watched the lines of her body discover themselves again beneath the flick of soft hair. The barn found its rhythm, the tick of the heat lamp, the creak of leather hung to dry, the whisper of straw under hooves. Then came the first morning she pulled the lead rope from his hand. She didn't run, didn't spook. She just turned her head toward the fence line on the north side of the property and stood very, very still, one ear pivoted like a compass needle. Tom followed her gaze to the low hills beyond his boundary, where the land fell into a narrow gully choked with scrub. What is it, June? He asked. She didn't answer, not with sound. But she kept looking north, as if some small voice out there had finally become loud enough for her to hear, and for the first time since he'd brought her home, Tom felt the oddest flicker of expectation, like a door, somewhere, had just clicked unlocked. The next morning, Tom couldn't shake the image of June staring toward the northern fence line. Something about her focus had felt deliberate, almost knowing. He poured coffee, stood by the kitchen window, and looked out across the pasture. June was already outside, the weak winter light catching on her coat. She was stronger now, still thin, but no longer fragile. She took slow, purposeful steps, occasionally lifting her head toward the same direction as before. Tom sighed, grabbed his jacket, and headed out. All right, girl, he said softly. Let's see what you're trying to tell me. He slipped on her halter, though she hardly needed it anymore, and together they walked toward the fence. Frost cracked beneath his boots. The closer they got, the more restless she became, ears twitching, tail flicking, breathing quickening. The fence ended at the edge of the gully, a steep dip carved out by years of rain and neglect. It wasn't much to look at, twisted roots, broken branches, and thick brush hiding whatever might lie below. June stopped abruptly and let out a low whinny, pawing at the dirt. Tom frowned. You want me to look down there? He asked, half smiling. She took a step closer to the edge, then looked back at him, eyes sharp with insistence. Carefully, Tom climbed down the slope, grabbing onto roots to keep his balance. The air grew colder, the soil darker. Near the bottom, something caught the light, a faint glint beneath the brush. He knelt and brushed away the dirt. At first, he thought it was an old piece of metal, but as he cleared more, a strange shape emerged. It was a small, rusted box. He pulled it free and opened it, coughing at the smell of earth and time. Inside were a few faded photographs, yellowed paper, and an old pocket watch still engraved with initials. R.L. Tom stared, confused. This land's been in my family forever, he murmured. Who the hell is R.L.? When he climbed back up, June was waiting. She pressed her muzzle to his chest as if urging him to understand. "You found this, didn't you?" he whispered. "You led me right to it." That night, he sat by the fireplace, studying the photographs. They showed a young man in a cavalry uniform, standing beside a horse that looked eerily like June, same white mark on the forehead, same sharp eyes. On the back of one picture, faded ink read, "For the one who brings her home." Tom felt a chill crawl down his spine. He checked the property records online and found that, more than a century ago, the ranch had been owned by a Robert Langdon, a man who vanished after the war, leaving behind no heirs and no trace. The initials on the pocket watch matched perfectly, RL. He looked out at the barn, where June slept peacefully, and whispered, "What are you, girl?" For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. There was something extraordinary about this horse, something that connected past and present, pain and healing. Tom didn't believe in ghosts, but as the fire flickered low and the watch ticked faintly in his hand, he began to wonder whether some souls simply find each other, no matter how much time has passed. The next morning, he woke to the sound of hooves, steady, strong, alive. June was running, really running, across the pasture, mane flying, body whole again. Tom stood at the fence and smiled, realizing that the dollar he'd spent had bought him something far greater than he ever expected, a reason to believe again. The days turned warmer, and with spring came a kind of peace Tom hadn't felt in years. The ranch, once silent and gray, began to breathe again. Wildflowers pushed through cracks in the earth, the air smelled of rain, and June, strong, gleaming, full of quiet fire, followed him everywhere like a loyal shadow. Each morning, Tom woke up before sunrise, just to hear her soft nicker as he stepped out the door. He would brew coffee, pour a little into an old tin cup, and share a few drops with her like some sacred ritual. "To survival," he'd say, and she'd nudge his shoulder as if to answer, "To hope." But sometimes, when the wind blew from the north, she'd stop and lift her head again, eyes searching, body tense. It was the same direction where she had led him to the rusted box. Tom began to feel that the land itself carried old secrets, whispers of something unfinished. He'd think of Robert Langdon, the man in the photograph, and wonder if the horse that once stood beside him had been June's ancestor, or perhaps, in some strange, poetic way, June herself. The idea sounded foolish, but there was no denying the bond between them felt older than time. Hayes, the vet, saw it too. "You know," she said one afternoon, watching June graze near the barn, "I've seen a lot of rescues, but never one like this. That horse looks at you like she remembers you." Tom smiled softly. "Sometimes I think she does." In the evenings, he'd sit by the porch with his guitar, playing old songs that had long gathered dust. June would stand close, her head tilted as if listening to every note. And when he sang softly, songs he used to sing to his wife, he could swear he saw her eyes glisten in the dim light, mirroring his own quiet ache. One evening, while repairing a section of the fence, Tom noticed something half buried near the same gully where June had found the box. Curious, he dug it up carefully. It was a fragment of leather, an old saddle tag with the same initials carved into it, RL. Beneath it, tangled in the roots, was a silver chain, thin but still gleaming. He turned it over in his hand, wondering if Robert Langdon had once stood exactly where he was standing, perhaps losing something he'd meant to find again. Tom looked at June, who was watching him intently, ears forward, still and calm. "You led me to this too, didn't you?" he whispered. "You're not done yet, are you?" That night, as rain began to fall, Tom dreamed. He saw flashes, an open field, the sound of thunder, a man in uniform calling out a name, June. Then, a horse running toward the light. When he woke, his hands were trembling, and he could still hear the echo of that voice fading into dawn. The following morning, he walked to the barn. June stood waiting, her breath visible in the cool air. Tom stroked her mane, eyes full of both gratitude and confusion. "Maybe this was never about saving you," he said softly. "Maybe you were sent here to save me." June pressed her forehead gently against his chest and closed her eyes. The connection between them no longer felt like chance. It felt like destiny unfolding one quiet day at a time. But destiny wasn't done with them yet. Because a week later, something would happen that neither Tom nor June could have ever expected, something that would test that bond and reveal, once and for all, just how far a single act of kindness could reach. The morning began with a strange stillness. No wind, no birds, no sound at all except the slow creak of the barn door as Tom opened it. He felt something tighten in his chest, an unshakable sense that the day would not end like any other. June was restless, pacing in her stall, her muscles quivering with energy. When she saw Tom, she snorted sharply, stamping a hoof as if trying to speak. "Easy, girl," he said, approaching with a calm hand. But June didn't calm. Her head turned toward the north again, that same direction that had always called to her. Her nostrils flared, and she gave a deep, low neigh that echoed through the quiet ranch. Then she looked straight at him, eyes wide, urgent. Tom followed her gaze. Out past the fence, the sky was heavy and dark. A storm was brewing. He could see the line of gray clouds rolling over the hills, bringing a smell of rain and electricity. "Not today," he muttered, knowing how fast the gully could flood when the rain came. "We'll stay inside." But June wasn't having it. The moment he opened the stall door, she pushed past him, galloping toward the open pasture like she had somewhere to be. "June! Stop!" Tom shouted, running after her. His boots sank into the soft earth as the first drops of rain began to fall. She didn't stop. She raced toward the north fence, mane whipping, hoofs pounding with purpose. By the time Tom caught up, the rain was falling hard, soaking the ground into thick mud. June stood near the edge of the gully, trembling, not with fear, but focus. She kept pawing at the ground, scraping away mud and roots. Tom's breath came in ragged gasps as he climbed down beside her, shouting over the thunder. "What are you doing? You'll hurt yourself." But then he saw it, something shiny half buried where her hooves had struck. His heart skipped. Another glint of metal, larger this time. He dropped to his knees, digging with both hands until his fingers struck something solid, a small, rusted trunk, heavier than the one before. The storm raged above them, but Tom barely noticed. He wrenched it free and pulled it open, revealing stacks of oilcloth bundles. Inside them, rows of gold coins, dull with age but unmistakably real. His mind spun. "Robert Langdon," he whispered. This must have been his. June let out a sharp whinny and reared slightly, as if to warn him. The earth trembled beneath them, the slope of the gully was shifting under the force of the rain. Mud began to slide. "Go, June!" Tom yelled, trying to push her up toward safer ground. But she wouldn't move without him. "Go," he shouted again. But instead of running, she circled behind him and pressed her head against his back, guiding him toward the incline. The mud gave way beneath his feet, and he stumbled, clutching the chest. June pushed harder, hooves sinking deep, muscles straining. With one final surge, she shoved him up over the edge, just as the ground collapsed behind her. Tom screamed her name. "June!" The gully roared as water and soil crashed downward. For a terrible moment, he saw nothing but swirling mud and rain. He dropped the chest and scrambled to the edge, calling again and again, voice breaking through the storm. Then, through the chaos, a shape emerged. June, covered in mud, soaked, trembling, was still standing. She climbed, one step, then another, until she reached the top. Tom fell to his knees, wrapping his arms around her neck, sobbing into her mane. "You stupid, brave girl," he whispered, voice shaking. She pressed her muzzle against his chest, breathing hard, but alive. The storm passed slowly, leaving behind a bruised sky and silence broken only by their heavy breathing. The chest lay half buried beside them, its secret exposed, its story finally told. Tom looked at June and then at the horizon, realizing what she had done, not just today, but from the moment he found her. She had led him to the truth, to the treasure, to the life he thought he'd lost. As he held her close, he knew one thing for certain, the dollar he'd spent hadn't saved her life. She had saved his. The morning after the storm, the world looked washed clean. Mist hung low over the pasture, and sunlight glimmered through the droplets clinging to every blade of grass. Tom stood by the barn, staring at June as she grazed calmly near the fence, her coat shining like new copper under the rising sun. She looked peaceful, almost proud, as if she knew exactly what she had done. The chest lay open on the porch, its contents drying in the light. Rows of gold coins, a few handwritten letters wrapped in oilcloth, and one small locket, still warm from where Tom had held it all night. Inside the locket was a faded photograph, the same man, Robert Langdon, standing beside a horse that could have been June's twin. On the back, another inscription: "To whoever finds this, know that she will lead you home." Tom's throat tightened. It was no coincidence. Every step June had taken, every direction she had looked, every moment of restlessness had been part of something larger, something that had waited generations to be completed. He called Hayes later that day, half to tell someone, half to make sense of it all. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "That horse, she led me to buried treasure." Hayes laughed at first, but when she arrived and saw the gold for herself, her expression changed from disbelief to awe. "Tom," she whispered, "this could be worth hundreds of thousands, maybe more." Tom looked at June, who was watching them from a distance, head raised against the wind. "Then I guess she's the richest horse in the world," he said quietly. But he didn't mean the gold. He meant the way she had given him back something no money could ever buy: purpose. In the weeks that followed, he restored the ranch. He rebuilt the fences, replaced the broken roof, and turned the old barn into a sanctuary for abandoned horses. He named it June's Haven. Whenever someone asked how it all started, he'd smile and say, "With $1, one broken soul, and one miracle." People came from nearby towns to see the horse that had found gold, but Tom never let anyone treat her like a spectacle. She had done something greater than any story could explain. When he brushed her mane in the evenings, he'd whisper, "You found more than treasure, girl. You found me." Summer came, and with it, the scent of life. June would run across the open fields, strong and free, her mane flowing like a banner of light. Sometimes, Tom would stand at the fence and swear he could see another figure beside her, a shadow of that long-gone rider from the photographs, riding with her once again, only visible when the sun hit the grass just right. One evening, as the sun set fire to the horizon, Tom sat on the porch with his guitar. He played softly, the same melody he'd once played for his wife, and June walked over, resting her head on his shoulder. "You've given me more than I ever deserved," he said, tears glimmering in his eyes. "I paid $1 for you, but you gave me everything back." The light dimmed, and fireflies began to dance in the field. The air was warm, and the sound of horses from the sanctuary filled the quiet. Tom closed his eyes, feeling peace, not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from being found. Years later, locals would still tell the story of the man who bought a starving horse for $1 and found a fortune. But those who knew Tom best would always say the same thing: the real fortune wasn't buried in the ground, it was standing right beside him, with a white mark on her forehead and a heart that remembered everything. And every time the wind blew from the north, it carried with it the faintest sound: hooves, steady and strong, like a promise that some bonds never truly end.